Well, good morning, brothers and sisters. Thank you for joining us this morning at Online Home Church. It's great to see your bright and shining faces all over our nation. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful, at least in Atlanta, beautiful and bright final Sunday of July. It's great to see you. And as we celebrate the end of the summer, coming to a conclusion and getting ready for the start of school, we have some very serious readings to contemplate. You know, in our congregation and amongst the folks here assembled today, and I'm sure those who will be watching on our website in the future, we have a number of people who are dedicated to building and accumulating wealth and then passing it along to their families so that they can have a better life than the ones that they have lived. And in this congregation and in the folks that are going to be watching this later online, we have a number of people who advise folks on exactly how to do that. Retirement planning, estate planning, succession planning. There are lots of different ways to describe it. But basically, people spend their entire careers either accumulating and trying to plan on ways to use it in their retirement and then pass it along to their children for their benefit, or advising those on how to do so. Well, boy, let me tell you, our Old Testament lesson in Psalm today don't do you any favors if you're trying to assist others in planning for the future and how to take care of their loved ones when they leave this earth. Julia, thank you for reading that Old Testament lesson from Ecclesiastes. That's a tough one. This guy needs a little R&R, maybe a little vacation, because the author of Ecclesiastes is basically saying, all humans ever do is toil under the sun and it's miserable. And then you accumulate things, and when you're dead and gone, they go to people who didn't work for it. That's not much encouragement in the guise of retirement planning or estate planning. And yet, in the end, the author of Ecclesiastes summarizes kind of his philosophy on life, like the group from the 70s called Kansas. Maybe that should have been our opening hymn today. You remember that band? Dust in the wind. All we are is dust in the wind. That's kind of the summation of our Old Testament reading today. And the Psalm doesn't go much further. The Psalm this morning, Psalm 49, talks about how greed is bad, and ultimately we have to shun things like greed because it leads to evil and wickedness, like Paul ultimately tells the Colossians. The Psalm itself too says, ultimately we work really hard and have to do the best we can in life, but that in the end, all we are is God's, and we have to give everything to Him. That's why we chose our opening hymn this morning as "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." You know, I have to say, as great a job as the Crosby family did, and if you'd like a link to that, I'll send it out in our email this week. As great as the Crosby family did, there's a tiny little change in the way they sung "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing" compared to the way we have it in our hymnal, and it's an important one. At the start of the second verse, the young man from the Crosby family is singing, "Here I find my Ebenezer." That's a change that I think is primarily Protestant in the way folks have revised the hymn over the years. But in our hymnal, it says, "Here I find my greatest treasure." Here I find my greatest treasure instead of "Here I find my Ebenezer." To me, that's an important difference, especially given our sermon topic today about the accumulation of wealth and treasure and how to honor God through the way that we use it. You see, in our gospel lesson today, Jesus is approached by somebody who's having a dispute with his brother. In the old days, everything was hierarchical and patriarchal. And so if you're the oldest brother, you get everything from the father. If you're second brother or lower, you really get nothing but crumbs from the table. And so when this presumably young man comes to Jesus from the crowd and says, "Hey, Jesus, tell my brother to split the inheritance with me," that's because the system probably, we're just kind of reading between the lines, but the system probably was going to lead to the older brother getting everything and the younger brother getting nothing. Jesus says, "I'm not a judge or an arbitrator, and I'm not going to get involved in this particular family dispute. But let me just tell you a parable." And as we know from having studied the gospel, most of us our entire lives, when Jesus tells a parable to one person or is approached with a question from one person and then tells a parable to the entire crowd, he's talking to us 2,000 years later. And so Jesus tells the story of a rich man who's worked hard, just like the guy in Ecclesiastes, worked hard and toiled under the sun. And he's developed a lot of land, and he's grown wheat and grain on it in a way that that tended the land, and as we would say today, became a sustainable farm or a sustainable ranch. And now he's got barns that are full of grain and stored all of it as he was supposed to. But instead, now that the barns are full, instead of saying, I've got everything I need, I'm just going to eat, drink, and be merry, he says, I've got everything, I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry, and I'm going to tear those barns down, build bigger ones. I'm going to keep accumulating. And the response in the parable is directly from God. Because by the way, everybody, when Jesus tells a parable to the whole crowd, he's talking to us 2,000 years later. And when God or Jesus calls someone a fool or a hypocrite in those parables, they're talking directly to us. You fool, tonight, your very life is being asked for you. And what good is any of this that you've accumulated going to do for you when you go to heaven? Those that respect God and spend their wealth in his honor will be the ones who are rewarded in heaven, not the ones who build bigger barns. Again, this is a tough lesson for those who are focused on retirement planning and succession planning and estate planning, because God's telling the person in this parable, the rich man, hey, you just don't need that much. And you sure don't need to be sitting around and eating, drinking, and being merry while your very life is at risk. But it does, I think, pose a tremendous challenge to us. It's one that I've been wrestling with as I'm putting together my book on Christianity and capitalism and how those two fit together, the accumulation of wealth, the proper saving and maintenance and investment of it, and then the proper spending of it. This gospel lesson today is squarely in the heart of those issues. And I think maybe we can look to a sermon from Charles Wesley about 300 years ago for a little guidance on exactly how to make sense of our gospel lesson today. You see, John Wesley was the founder of the Methodist movement, and ultimately many of our brothers and sisters, and even some of us here in the congregation today, have attended Methodist church before. And when he was preaching and teaching all over England in the early 1700s, he was confronting some of the issues that we still confront 300 years later. In my search for the book, Christian Capitalist, I found a sermon on money that John Wesley gave in 1750. And I think he summarized what we're trying to struggle with and how we can make sense of our gospel lesson today beautifully. Gain all you can. In a capitalist system like they had in 18th century England or 21st century America, we're encouraged to work hard, just like we talk about in our lessons today, and accumulate. Save all you can. Wesley tells the members of his congregation to not be foolish in their spending, to not let the money that they earn or the goods that they accumulate burn a hole in their pocket, to save all you can and be prudent in the way that you manage what blessings God has given you. And then finally, and this is the part that I think Jesus was getting to in his parable, Wesley tells his congregation, give all you can. Gain all you can, save all you can, give all you can. You see, when Jesus is telling the rich man in the parable today, don't be a fool. Your life could end this very evening. Why would you tear down the barns you have and build bigger ones? He's basically saying the goods that you have received are God's blessing to you. Now it's time to share them with others. Do the work of God in the way that that God calls you to, and not in celebration of your accumulation of wealth. He's not telling the man to tear down the barns and give everything away. He's simply saying that by sitting back and relaxing and not tending to the things that God has given you, you're not doing God's work. And so I think Wesley summarized it beautifully back in 1750. Gain all you can, save all you can, give all you can, by ultimately encouraging us to work hard, encouraging us to accumulate and spend wisely, but spend in the way that God calls us to spend. Now, that's not as easy as it sounds, is it? The last few weeks, we've talked about how a prayerful life is difficult to accomplish, and a prayerful life is something to continue to strive for, because we as Christians and as children of God are unfinished works in progress. We're always kind of striving for a greater relationship, a more personal relationship with God in the path that Jesus lays out for us. And in this notion of how to develop a more prayerful life, whether it's through the appreciation of nature, whether it's through prayer, daily, hourly, even by minute, as some folks do, or whether it's through the work together with others, we develop a closer relationship with God and the way to discern what God is telling us to do with the wealth that we accumulate. So as we head here into the first week of August and the dog days of summer, I encourage you, don't tear down your barns to build bigger ones. Instead, take a look at the fount of every blessing, God above, and pray and ask him and ask others in our Christian community, what's the best way for us to use the blessings that God has given us to do his will, not only to help us and our families, but for those around us in this terrible, broken world. I will tell you one last thing, because one of our members of our congregation mentioned storage sheds. Storage sheds have been on our mind here lately because we have, Rebecca and I have just moved in this past month and found that even though the square footage of our new house is the same as the square footage of our old house, the layout has left us with an abundance of furniture and household goods. And so we've been debating whether to get a storage unit, build a new barn, as we hear about in our gospel lesson today. Instead, we've given the bulk of it away to charity. But the trend globally is not that way, everybody. There's a I don't know how you pronounce it. I think it's Mordor, M-O-R-D-O-R. Mordor is basically a business analytical outfit that studies storage units. And since the global pandemic, the global storage unit industry has grown by 30%. From about $48 billion to now $64 billion. That's how much people are buying and renting storage units to put away their stuff. So the trend in all humanity is to keep growing and building bigger barns. I would suggest to you that for our part, we should consider how we can manage the barns that we have and ensure that the goods that we have and the wealth that we've accumulated can be used for the benefit of others. In Jesus' name, amen. And now with Christians around the world and across time, let's say together the Nicene Creed.